A city block in Manhattan buckles inward as if reality itself hesitates. Glass implodes across 3 skyscrapers at once, alarms cascade through overlapping floors, and a red beam carves a glowing trench through the asphalt that keeps going long after it should have met resistance. People run without knowing where to run because the air feels thick and wrong, as if the space between things has turned solid. In the center of the street, untouched by the chaos, a tall man in black stands with his hands in his pockets, blindfold on, posture loose and almost bored. The beam slams into him and stops inches from his chest without an explosion, without deflection, without any visible barrier. Homelander hovers above, eyes burning brighter as he pours more force into an attack that refuses to move forward. The street collapses around them while the man below doesn't even blink, and in that moment Homelander realizes he is not the most dangerous thing in the sky. This is where the balance shifts, and it only gets worse from here. If you think this was a fight, you haven't seen the real damage yet. Subscribe, because what follows isn't about power clashing. It's about what happens when the world watches that power fail, and everything built on fear begins to unravel. The first thing Homelander notices is that the man in black doesn't react at all. Not to the screaming, not to the collapsing glass, not to the red glare pouring down from the sky like a judgment. He stands in the center of the ruined street with his hands in his pockets and his head tilted slightly, as if he's listening to something only he can hear. The beam from Homelander's eyes connects with him in a clean, direct line, and then simply stops, hovering inches from his chest without touching cloth or skin. There is no explosion, no reflection, no visible barrier. It is as if the concept of distance has thickened into something solid. Homelander pushes harder, jaw clenching, eyes brightening to a painful white red, and the beam grows louder, hotter, more violent, yet it still refuses to cross that invisible gap. People on the sidewalk stare in shock before remembering to run. Cars crash into each other as drivers abandon their seats. Above, news helicopters scramble to reframe their cameras because nothing in their lenses makes sense anymore. Homelander has cut through fighter jets, through armored vehicles, through buildings, and the man below isn't even bracing himself. He isn't dodging, isn't shielding his face, isn't doing anything that looks like survival. He is simply existing in a way that makes the attack meaningless. Gojo Satoru tilts his head slightly and sighs, not out of fear or effort but mild disappointment, like someone testing a vending machine that ate their coin. His voice, calm and conversational, carries up through the chaos without strain. He asks Homelander if this is the strongest thing he can do. The question is not a taunt. It sounds genuinely curious, like a teacher checking a student's first attempt at a problem. Homelander hears it perfectly despite the noise, and for the first time in years, something unfamiliar crawls up the back of his neck. He stops firing and hovers silently, studying the man. Gojo doesn't move when the beam ceases. He doesn't take a defensive stance or prepare for a counterattack. He simply looks upward, blindfold covering his eyes, with an expression that suggests he already understands everything he needs to know. Homelander has faced fear in people's eyes before: anger, defiance, hatred, and worship. What he sees here is none of those things. It is disinterest. Homelander drops from the sky and lands hard enough to crack the pavement, dust erupting around him. He walks forward slowly, boots crunching over broken glass, staring at Gojo with growing irritation. There is no way this man is a soup he hasn't heard of. Vought tracks everything. Vought knows everyone. Yet this person stands in the middle of Manhattan like he belongs here more than anyone else, like he is not surprised by any of it. He throws a punch. It is not a testing strike. It is the kind of blow that caves in armored vehicles and liquefies bone. His fist travels a clean, brutal arc toward Gojo's face, and then, just like the beam, it stops. Not against skin, not against an object. It halts in empty air, inches away, his knuckles trembling as if pressed against an invisible wall made of space itself. Homelander's arm strains as he tries to force it forward, veins standing out in his neck, muscles flexing, but the distance between them refuses to close. Gojo doesn't flinch. He doesn't lean back. He doesn't even seem to acknowledge how close the fist is to his face. He simply speaks again in that same light tone, remarking that Homelander should probably not skip introductions when meeting someone new. The comment lands harder than any physical blow. It reframes the entire moment from a fight into something awkward and embarrassing, like a social mistake Homelander didn't realize he made. Across the city, phones buzz with emergency alerts as live feeds begin to circulate. News anchors speak over each other trying to describe what they're seeing, but the words don't come easily because the footage shows Homelander attacking someone who is not reacting, not resisting, not being harmed. The image is wrong in a way that makes viewers uneasy without knowing why. Homelander is supposed to be the unstoppable one. He is supposed to be the thing you cannot argue with. Up on a distant rooftop, Starlight watches through binoculars with a growing sense of dread. She has seen Homelander overpower SUPs, military squads, entire situations, but this is different. The man below isn't fighting back. He isn't even posturing. He looks relaxed, almost polite, and Homelander looks confused. That confusion deepens when Homelander pulls back his fist and throws another punch, then another, then a rapid flurry that would reduce anyone else to a red mist. Each strike stops at the same invisible boundary, tapping uselessly against nothing. The sound is dull, like gloves hitting padded glass. Gojo finally lifts one hand from his pocket, not to block, but to gesture casually as if asking Homelander to slow down because this is getting repetitive. Homelander steps back, breathing harder now, not from exertion but from frustration. He lifts off the ground and rockets backward into the air before diving forward at supersonic speed, shoulder aimed directly at Gojo's torso. The impact should have sent shockwaves through the street. Instead, Homelander freezes mid-charge, suspended inches away, his momentum erased by something he cannot see. The ground beneath Gojo doesn't even crack. Gojo sighs again, softer this time, like he's realizing this is going to take longer than he hoped. He explains gently that Homelander can't reach him. He says it the way someone explains a simple rule of physics, not a threat or a boast. He mentions that the space between them is not behaving normally and that pushing harder won't help. Homelander hears the words, but they don't fit into any framework he understands. There is no strength contest here, no durability contest. His entire identity has been built on the idea that force solves problems. Around them, the city is still panicking. Sirens converge from every direction. Police cordons begin forming blocks away because nobody knows how close is safe. Helicopters circle wider. Vaught's crisis team is already on encrypted calls trying to identify the man with the blindfold, but no database returns a match. They watch Homelander, their ultimate asset, failing to make contact with a target who hasn't even taken his hands out of his pockets. Gojo tilts his head slightly as if listening to distant music. His 6 eyes have already mapped everything: Homelander's biology, the energy in his body, the pattern of his movement, the emotional instability humming just beneath his expression. He understands the man in front of him more completely than Homelander understands himself, and that knowledge makes Gojo look almost sympathetic. Homelander tries something new. He grabs a chunk of shattered concrete from the street and hurls it point-blank at Gojo's face. The debris stops in midair like the beam and the punches before it, hanging uselessly in front of him before dropping straight down. The simplicity of the failure is what makes it terrifying. There is no resistance to measure, no impact to interpret. It is as if the world itself is refusing to let Homelander interact with this person. For the first time, Homelander's expression shifts from anger to something closer to unease. He asks Gojo who he is. Gojo smiles faintly and says his name like it's the least important part of the situation. He adds that he let Homelander attack first because he wanted to see what this world's strongest looked like. The implication lands slowly and painfully. In the distance, Starlight lowers her binoculars with shaking hands. She doesn't know who this man is, but she knows what she's witnessing. For the first time since she joined the Seven, She is watching Homelander be powerless in real time. Gojo finally takes both hands out of his pockets. He doesn't raise them in a fighting stance. He doesn't tense his body. He simply rolls his shoulders once, as if loosening up after standing too long. Homelander instinctively takes a step back without realizing he's doing it. The air feels heavier now, thicker, like the space itself is being gently compressed. Gojo says, almost apologetically, that he's seen enough. And before Homelander can decide what to do next, he realizes with a chill that this entire time, he hasn't been the one in control of when the fight starts. Homelander doesn't recognize the feeling at first because it has never belonged to him before. It isn't fear in the way civilians feel it, loud and panicked and desperate. It is quiet and creeping, like the realization that gravity has slightly changed and nobody else has noticed yet. He stares at Gojo's relaxed posture, at the way the man rolls his shoulders like he's about to stretch, and something deep inside him begins to understand that this situation is not a stalemate. It has never been a stalemate. It has been a demonstration. Gojo takes a single step forward. The distance between them doesn't close in a normal way. There is no footfall sound, no clear shift in position, yet suddenly Gojo is closer than he should be. Homelander reflexively rockets backward into the sky, putting 50 feet between them in less than a second. The air cracks from the speed. He hovers there, chest rising and falling, eyes locked onto the blindfolded man below. Gojo hasn't moved from where he stands. Homelander blinks confused and looks down at the pavement to reorient himself. He is still hovering in the same place he retreated to, but Gojo is now standing directly beneath him as if the ground itself slid him there. No running, no jumping, no visible motion, just repositioned. Gojo looks up casually and asks if Homelander is done testing things randomly because it's starting to feel repetitive. His tone is polite, almost helpful, like he's offering to skip ahead in a conversation that's dragging. Homelander feels a flicker of anger surge back, not because of the words but because of the calmness behind them. He is used to people reacting to him emotionally. This man reacts to him academically. Homelander fires his heat vision again, this time sweeping it wildly across Gojo's body in a sustained arc meant to slice him apart. The beam dances over Gojo's torso, neck, and head, but never makes contact. It bends slightly around him, like light curving around a gravitational field. The street behind Gojo melts and erupts in a line of glowing ruin, but the man himself remains untouched, standing in the middle of a growing crater as if the laws of physics have politely excused him. Above the rooftops, news helicopters pull even farther back. The live feed now shows an image that is impossible to explain. Homelander attacking at full power while the target remains perfectly still. Commentators struggle to narrate what's happening without sounding confused. The words force field and unknown soup ability are thrown around, but nothing matches what the cameras show. This isn't deflection. This is negation. In Vought Tower, executives gather in a glass conference room, staring at the wall of screens. Ashley Barrett grips the edge of the table so hard her knuckles whiten. Nobody recognizes the man. No tracking system flagged him. No background file exists. Yet he stands in Manhattan as if he owns it, and Homelander is visibly failing to do anything about it. Back on the street, Gojo raises one hand slowly. Homelander reacts instantly, flinching backward in the air. He doesn't even realize he's doing it. Gojo isn't attacking. He's just lifting his hand to scratch the back of his neck. The casualness of the gesture is what makes Homelander's reaction humiliating. He feels it immediately, the loss of composure, and it makes him angrier than any injury ever could. Gojo speaks again, explaining in a calm, almost conversational tone that Homelander's problem is not strength. It's that he's trying to interact with Gojo the way he interacts with everything else. He says the space between them is not something Homelander can push through because it isn't behaving like normal space anymore. He mentions it like a teacher correcting a basic misunderstanding. Homelander descends back to the ground slowly, eyes never leaving Gojo. The street around them is wrecked, smoke curling from ruptured asphalt, sirens echoing from all directions, but the focus has narrowed to just the two of them. Homelander asks what Gojo wants. Gojo answers honestly. He says he was curious. That answer lands harder than any insult. Homelander is not used to being someone else's experiment. He is the one who tests the world, who proves himself against it. The idea that someone is calmly evaluating him like a specimen makes his stomach twist. Gojo tilts his head slightly and says that Homelander has had plenty of time to try. Now it's his turn to demonstrate something. He doesn't lunge, he doesn't strike, he simply lowers his hand. The air changes. Homelander feels it immediately, like the pressure inside his skull has increased by a fraction. The sound of the city dulls, as if cotton has been stuffed into his ears. The smoke in the street stops drifting. Shards of glass hanging mid-fall from broken windows freeze in place. Even the flashing lights of distant police cars seem to stutter. Homelander looks around in confusion. He tries to step back and realizes his movement is sluggish, like he's pushing through thick water. His muscles still respond, but the world around him doesn't seem to agree with his speed anymore. His breathing sounds too loud in his own head. Gojo hasn't changed posture at all. He explains softly that he hasn't attacked yet. This is just a side effect of being near him when he decides to take things slightly more seriously. He says it like he's apologizing for the inconvenience. Homelander tries to fly upward again, but the motion feels wrong. The air resists him in a way it never has. Panic begins to creep into his chest because this sensation is unfamiliar and uncontrollable. He has always measured himself against physical resistance. This is not physical. Across the city, people begin to notice strange delays. Sounds echo oddly. Movements feel fractionally out of sync. Nobody understands why. Cameras glitch, not because of interference, but because what they're capturing doesn't line up with how time normally flows. Starlight watches from her rooftop as the air around Gojo seems to shimmer faintly, like heat distortion. She can't explain it, but she knows instinctively that something has shifted from demonstration to warning. Homelander tries one more desperate attack. He lunges forward with everything he has, screaming as he drives both fists toward Gojo's head. The motion is powerful, violent, fueled by rage and confusion. His fists stop inches away, suspended again in that invisible boundary, but this time he feels something new. He feels small. Gojo looks at the halted fists with mild interest and comments that Homelander's persistence is admirable. Then he gently taps Homelander's forearm with one finger. The touch is light, casual, almost friendly. Homelander is thrown backward like he's been hit by a freight train. He doesn't fly because he pushed off. He flies because the space around him violently corrects itself. He crashes through the facade of a nearby building, disappearing into a shower of concrete and glass, the entire structure shuddering from the impact. Silence hangs over the street for half a second. Gojo lowers his hand and sighs softly, like someone who finally finished a long, tedious conversation. Inside the wrecked building, Homelander lies buried in debris, staring up through a jagged hole in the ceiling. He isn't injured. His body is fine, but his mind is racing in a way it never has before. That wasn't strength. That wasn't speed. That wasn't anything he understands. That was control. And for the first time in his life, Homelander realizes he is standing in front of someone who does not need to defeat him to prove superiority. Because the superiority was never in question. Inside Vought Tower, nobody is speaking anymore. The wall of screens shows the same looping angles from helicopters, traffic cams, and phone footage, and every angle tells the same incomprehensible story. Homelander is not winning, not losing, but failing in a way that makes the concept of a fight meaningless. Ashley Barrett stands at the head of the conference table with her hands braced against the glass, eyes wide and unfocused as analysts around her whisper overlapping explanations that don't satisfy anyone. They call it a force field, a spatial distortion, an unknown soup classification, but none of the labels help because the man on the screen hasn't visibly done anything. He has not attacked. He has not defended. He has simply existed in a way that nullifies Homelander. One of the tech analysts rewinds the footage frame by frame, trying to find the moment Gojo moved when he appeared beneath Homelander in midair. There is no movement to isolate, no blur, no displacement. He is simply there, as if space edited itself between frames. The realization spreads quietly through the room that they are not looking at a stronger soup. They are looking at something that does not follow the same rules as sups at all. Ashley demands a full database sweep. Facial recognition returns nothing. DNA registries return nothing. International black sites, experimental programs, off-the-books projects, nothing. The man does not exist in any system Vought controls. That absence is what terrifies them most. Vaught's power is built on knowing where every variable is. And this is a variable that appeared in Manhattan without warning, without origin, without a file. Back on the street, dust still drifts down from the building Homelander crashed through. Gojo stands in the same place, hands relaxed at his sides now, watching the hole in the facade with mild curiosity. Sirens wail closer, but no one dares approach the immediate block. Police cars stop 2 streets away. Helicopters widen their circle. The world is keeping a cautious distance from a situation it doesn't understand. Homelander steps out of the ruined building slowly, floating back into view. His suit is scuffed, cape torn slightly at the edge, but his body is untouched. His expression, however, is different. The confidence hasn't vanished, but it has been forced to share space with something else. Calculation. He stares at Gojo without speaking, trying to rebuild a sense of control that keeps slipping away. Gojo notices the change instantly. Through the 6 eyes, he reads the shift in Homelander's breathing, the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes no longer burn with blind aggression but careful assessment. Gojo smiles faintly and remarks that this is much better. He says fights are more interesting when the other person starts thinking. That comment travels through live microphones and reaches Vought Tower seconds later. The room goes silent again as they hear the calm, conversational tone. This man is not strained. He is not threatened. He is not even winded. He sounds like someone having a casual discussion in the middle of a disaster zone. Ashley turns to the legal team and asks the question nobody wants to answer. What happens to Vought if Homelander is seen being powerless on live television? The answer hangs unspoken in the room. Vought doesn't sell protection. Vought sells the illusion of invincibility, and that illusion is dissolving in real time. On a rooftop miles away, Starlight lowers her phone slowly after watching the live stream. Her mind is racing. She knows Homelander's psychology better than most. She knows how fragile his ego is beneath the manufactured image, and she can already tell this is not going to end with him walking away calmly. This is going to escalate because Homelander cannot afford for this to be happening. Down on the street, Homelander finally speaks. He asks Gojo what he is, not who, what. The wording is careful now. Gojo answers lightly that he's a sorcerer, though he admits that word probably doesn't translate well here. He adds that he's never seen anything like Homelander before either, and that he appreciates the introduction. The politeness is unbearable. Homelander feels like he's being humored. Without warning, Homelander shoots straight upward into the sky, disappearing into the clouds in less than a second. Gojo watches him go without moving. He doesn't chase. He doesn't react. He simply waits, hands returning to his pockets, posture loose again. To anyone watching, it looks like Homelander retreated. Inside Vought Tower, panic spikes. Analysts shout that Homelander is climbing past commercial airspace, accelerating rapidly. Ashley yells for comms to get him on the line, but he isn't responding. They track his trajectory and realize he isn't fleeing. He's creating distance. High above the city, Homelander stops and looks down at Manhattan from near the edge of the atmosphere. His eyes glow again, brighter than before. If he can't punch this man, can't touch him, then he will remove everything around him. He will erase the environment itself. He will prove that power still means something. On the street, Gojo glances upward slightly, sensing the buildup instantly. He sighs in mild annoyance, like someone realizing a child is about to throw a tantrum in public. Homelander unleashes a sustained, city-sweeping blast of heat vision from the sky. The beam carves downward in a massive arc, tearing through rooftops, slicing across buildings, igniting entire blocks in a line of molten destruction aimed directly at Gojo's position. The attack is so large it stops being a precise strike and becomes a disaster event. People scream as fire erupts across multiple streets, structures collapse, the city shakes. Gojo doesn't move. The beam descends toward him like a falling sun and stops at the same invisible boundary as every other attack. The energy disperses sideways, splitting around him like water hitting a stone, carving two glowing trenches down parallel streets while leaving the space he occupies perfectly untouched. From above, the destruction forms a symmetrical scar with Gojo standing calmly in the untouched center. Helicopter cameras capture the image perfectly. Within seconds, the footage spreads everywhere. Homelander sees it from the sky and something inside him breaks. He is no longer trying to win. He is trying to deny what he's seeing. He fires again, wider, harder, sweeping across half the block, and the same thing happens. The city burns around Gojo while the man himself stands in a circle of stillness, hands in pockets, head tilted slightly as if bored by the repetition. In Vought Tower, nobody speaks anymore. They are watching their strongest asset devastate Manhattan and still fail to affect the target. This is no longer a fight problem. This is a public relations catastrophe of historic scale. Gojo finally looks mildly disappointed. He comments softly that this is getting messy. Then he adds, almost to himself, that he should probably step in before Homelander hurts too many people trying to prove a point. That is the moment the situation changes from observation to intervention. Because until now, Gojo has allowed Homelander to act first. And for the first time since arriving in this world, Gojo decides he's going to do something. The fires spread faster than the sirens. Entire rooftops burn in long, jagged lines where Homelander's heat vision carved through them, and the wind begins carrying sparks across adjacent blocks. Smoke rises in thick columns that blur the skyline into something unrecognizable. People are no longer running away from a single street. They are evacuating entire neighborhoods because nobody knows where the next beam might land. The chaos is no longer centered on a fight. It has become a city-wide disaster triggered by one man's refusal to accept what he's seeing. And in the center of it all, Gojo finally moves. He doesn't rush. He doesn't leap into the air. He simply steps forward, and the effect is immediate and unsettling. The air around him seems to settle, like turbulence smoothing out after a storm. The drifting smoke slows its chaotic swirl and begins to move in a more orderly pattern. The falling embers from above hesitate slightly before continuing their descent. It's subtle, but visible enough that nearby cameras catch it and zoom in. Gojo looks up toward the sky where Homelander hovers as a distant red dot in the clouds. His head tilts slightly, and his posture shifts from passive observation to mild engagement. It isn't dramatic. There's no visible buildup, but the difference is clear enough that even people watching through screens can feel that something has changed. On her rooftop, Starlight feels it immediately. She can't explain how, but the entire atmosphere of the situation shifts from frantic chaos to controlled stillness, like a room quieting when someone important walks in. She watches Gojo with growing disbelief because he isn't responding to the destruction with urgency or panic. He looks like someone tidying up after a mess that mildly inconvenienced him. Inside Vought Tower, Ashley leans closer to the screens. One of the analysts points out that the fires closest to Gojo's position are behaving strangely. Flames that should be spreading sideways are bending around a circular area in the street, as if guided away from it by invisible walls. Debris that should be collapsing inward is falling outward instead. The damage is reorganizing itself around him. Nobody in the room understands what they're seeing, but the conclusion is unavoidable. The man in black is no longer just ignoring the chaos. He is quietly dictating how it unfolds. High above, Homelander sees the same thing. From his vantage point, the burning grid of streets below looks like a war zone, except for one perfectly untouched circle at the center. And now, that circle is growing. Not physically expanding, but exerting influence. The destruction is bending around it like water flowing around a rock in a river. Homelander feels anger surge again, but this time it's mixed with something heavier. The situation is no longer about proving dominance. It is slipping into something worse. It is starting to look like he is the cause of a problem someone else is calmly correcting. He descends from the sky again, slower this time, landing hard a short distance from Gojo. The pavement cracks beneath his boots, but the impact feels meaningless compared to everything else happening. He stares at Gojo, waiting for a reaction, for a challenge, for anything that frames this as a fight. Gojo glances at the burning buildings and sighs softly. He remarks that Homelander has a bad habit of escalating things emotionally. The tone isn't insulting. It's observational, like commenting on someone's poor table manners. He says that if Homelander keeps this up, the city will be gone before they finish talking, and that would be inconvenient. The word inconvenient hits harder than any insult could. Homelander demands to know what Gojo is doing. Gojo answers simply that he's preventing the damage from spreading further. He gestures casually to the surrounding blocks, where fires that should be racing down entire streets are slowing, flickering, and dying out as if starved of oxygen. Not extinguished violently, not blasted away, but gently denied the ability to continue. Cameras capture everything. The narrative online begins to shift in real time. At first, people were watching Homelander fight an unknown threat. Now they are watching an unknown man quietly stop a catastrophe that Homelander is causing. Miles away, Billy Butcher watches the footage on a cracked laptop screen in a safe house. He leans back in his chair, eyes narrowing as he studies Gojo's relaxed posture. Butcher has spent years learning how subs behave under pressure, how they posture, how they threaten, how they dominate through spectacle. This man does none of that. He looks bored, and Homelander looks rattled. Butcher mutters to himself that this might be the first time he's seen someone make Homelander look small without even trying. Back on the street, Gojo raises one hand again, not toward Homelander but toward the burning skyline. The motion is lazy, almost absent-minded. The effect is immediate. A wave of stillness ripples outward from him, not as a visible force but as a change in how everything behaves. Windows that were about to shatter from heat stress hold together. Support beams that were moments from collapsing stabilize long enough for people to escape. The city doesn't repair itself, but it stops getting worse. Homelander watches this happen and finally understands something that terrifies him more than any attack could. This man is not reacting to him. He is prioritizing the environment over the fight. Homelander is not the center of Gojo's attention. That realization hits like a physical blow. Homelander rockets forward again in frustration, throwing another punch at Gojo's head. It stops, as always, inches away. Gojo doesn't even look at it this time. He keeps his gaze on the skyline, adjusting something unseen, while Homelander's fist hangs uselessly in the air. Gojo casually comments that Homelander should calm down because he's making things harder for everyone. The words are gentle, but the implication is crushing. Homelander is being treated like a disruptive child during an emergency. Across Manhattan, people begin noticing something strange. The fires are dying out in unnatural patterns. Buildings that should be collapsing remain standing just long enough for evacuation. The epicenter of the disaster isn't spreading anymore. and social media begins circulating a new clip. The man with the blindfold standing calmly while the destruction reorganizes itself around him. The public perception shifts in minutes. Homelander sees it happening in real time through the helicopters, through the phones pointed at them from distant rooftops. The cameras are no longer focused on him. They are focused on Gojo. And for the first time in his life, Homelander feels irrelevant. Gojo finally turns his head back toward him, sensing the emotional spike instantly. He says softly that Homelander should stop now, not as a threat, as a suggestion, a polite one. That politeness is what breaks something inside Homelander. Because he realizes Gojo isn't asking him to stop for Gojo's sake. He's asking him to stop for the city's sake. Which means Gojo has already decided that Homelander is not the real problem here. Homelander takes a slow step back, eyes wide, breathing heavier. Around them, the fires continue to die out, the smoke thins, and the chaos settles into something controlled. The city is still damaged, but it is no longer spiraling. And every camera in Manhattan is pointed at the man who made that happen without raising his voice, without attacking, without moving more than a few steps. Homelander looks around and finally understands the worst part. This is no longer a fight he can win. This is a narrative he cannot control. In the distance, military helicopters begin entering the airspace, called in too late to stop the destruction, but arriving just in time to witness who stopped it. And Gojo notices them immediately. The military helicopters arrive in a tight formation, cutting through the thinning smoke with disciplined precision. Their presence is loud, mechanical, and familiar in a way that feels almost comforting to the people still evacuating the area. For decades, the military has represented the last line of order when everything else fails. Now they sweep over Manhattan expecting to contain a soup incident that has already spiraled beyond anything in their training manuals. From above, the pilots see two figures in the street below. One is instantly recognizable. The other is standing perfectly still at the center of a strangely undamaged circle in the pavement. The briefings they received on the way here describe an unknown hostile entity resisting Homelander with an advanced defensive ability. What they do not understand yet is that the situation has already moved past hostility and into something far more delicate. Gojo glances up at the approaching helicopters and sighs softly. He can feel the intent inside them, the tension, the readiness to act. Through the six eyes, he reads the configuration of weapons, the nervous heartbeats of the pilots, the chain of command forming decisions in real time. He understands immediately that they are about to make a mistake. Homelander notices the helicopters too, and something in his expression shifts again. Relief flickers across his face. Authority has arrived. Structure. Witnesses who still believe in the old rules. He floats upward slightly, regaining a bit of posture, as if the presence of the military restores some of the narrative he feels slipping away. Over loudspeakers, a commanding voice orders both individuals to stand down and remain still. The words echo awkwardly through the ruined street. Gojo raises one eyebrow slightly beneath the blindfold, amused by the phrasing. Homelander smirks faintly, as if the situation is finally returning to something he recognizes. The first helicopter fires a warning shot. A high-caliber round slams into the space in front of Gojo and stops, suspended exactly like Homelander's punches and beams. The bullet hangs there for a moment before dropping straight down to the pavement. The pilots hesitate, confused, then open fire in a controlled burst. Dozens of rounds streak downward and freeze midair around Gojo in a strange metallic halo. None of them touch him. None of them deflect. They simply stop existing as threats. Cameras capture the image from 3 different angles. Within seconds, the footage spreads again. This time, the narrative shifts even further. It is no longer Homelander failing to affect the man. Now it is the United States military. Inside the lead helicopter, the pilot swears under his breath. This is not in any manual. He requests permission for escalation. The response from command comes quickly. They are authorized to neutralize the unknown target by any means necessary. Gojo rubs the back of his neck lazily and mutters that this is getting repetitive. He looks upward and calls out politely, asking them to stop because they're going to hurt someone by accident. His voice carries clearly through the chaos, picked up by open microphones. The second helicopter launches a small missile. Homelander watches with growing anticipation. If this man can't be punched, can't be burned, maybe overwhelming explosive force will do something. The missile streaks downward in a plume of smoke and fire, slamming directly into Gojo's position. The explosion is massive. The street disappears in a cloud of flame and debris. Shockwaves ripple outward, shattering windows for blocks. People scream again as the blast rolls through nearby intersections. And then the smoke clears. Gojo stands exactly where he was, hands in his pockets, surrounded by a perfect sphere of untouched air. The explosion bent around him like water around a stone, carving a crater in the street while leaving a clean, untouched space at the center. Even his clothes are undisturbed. The pilots go silent. Homelander's smirk fades. Gojo looks up again, this time less amused. He explains calmly that none of this is going to work and that they should probably stop before someone really gets hurt. There is no anger in his voice, just mild concern, like someone warning children not to run near a pool. Command doesn't hear concern, they hear defiance. A second missile launches. This time, Gojo lifts one hand slightly. The missile stops in midair 20 feet above him. It doesn't explode. It doesn't fall. It just hangs there, engine still firing uselessly against space that refuses to let it advance. The sight is so unnatural that even the seasoned pilots hesitate. Gojo flicks his finger gently. The missile rotates in the air, reorients itself, and shoots straight upward, detonating harmlessly far above the city in a distant bloom of light. That is the moment the military realizes they are not engaging a hostile target. They are engaging something that can casually rearrange their actions without effort. In Vought Tower, the room is dead silent again. Ashley stares at the screen with horror dawning across her face. This is worse than Homelander losing. This is a situation where conventional power, military power, suit power, institutional power, is being treated like background noise. On the street, Homelander looks at Gojo with a new expression entirely. Not anger, not confusion. Recognition. He is finally understanding that this man is not resisting attacks. He is allowing them. Gojo lowers his hand and glances at Homelander with mild curiosity. He comments that Homelander should probably tell them to stop, since they seem to be listening to him. The suggestion is casual, but it carries weight. Gojo is handing Homelander an opportunity to regain some control. Homelander hesitates. Because if he tells them to stop, he admits that he needs this man's permission for the situation to end. The helicopters circle uncertainly overhead, awaiting new orders. The city holds its breath. Cameras stream every second to millions of viewers. Gojo sighs softly and looks back up at the helicopters. And for the first time, his posture shifts from patient to decisive. For several long seconds, nothing happens. The helicopters continue circling. Homelander hovers uncertainly a short distance away. The street is quiet except for distant sirens and the crackle of dying fires. Everyone watching, pilots, soldiers, Vought executives, civilians on rooftops, millions through screens, feels the same strange pause, like the world is waiting for permission to continue. Gojo exhales softly. It's not dramatic, not loud, just a small breath that signals a decision has been made. He raises his hand to about chest height and turns his palm upward as if checking whether it's starting to rain. There is no visible energy, no glow, no sound. but the effect is immediate and undeniable. Every helicopter in the sky jolts slightly, as if caught in a sudden pocket of turbulence that only they can feel. Inside the cockpits, warning lights flash. Instruments flicker. The pilots grip their controls tighter as their aircraft begin drifting out of formation without input. They try to correct course, but the helicopters aren't responding normally. They are being nudged, gently, precisely, sideways through the air. From the ground, it looks almost polite. The helicopters are not crashing. They are being repositioned, slid backward through the sky like pieces on a board. Within seconds, they are no longer above the street but a safe distance away, hovering over empty blocks where no civilians remain. Gojo lowers his hand. The pilots regain full control at once. Engines stabilize. Warning lights vanish. None of them understand what just happened, but they all feel the same thing. They were moved. Homelander watches this with a tightening jaw. No force, no violence, no display of strength, just quiet correction. The situation is being rearranged around him like he is not central to it. Gojo turns his head slightly toward Homelander and remarks that the noise was getting distracting. His tone is conversational, almost apologetic. Then he adds that now they can talk properly. That word, talk, hits harder than any punch. Homelander steps forward, fists clenched. He demands to know what Gojo wants, what his goal is, why he's here. The questions spill out fast now, driven by something deeper than anger. He needs a framework. He needs a reason that fits into his understanding of power. Gojo answers honestly. He says he was curious about this world's strongest, and now he's seen enough to understand the situation. He adds that Homelander is not malicious in a calculated way, but emotionally unstable in a way that makes him dangerous to everyone around him. The analysis is calm, precise, and devastatingly accurate. Homelander feels exposed in a way he never has before, not physically, personally. Gojo continues, explaining that he let Homelander attack first because that's the fastest way to understand someone. He says you can tell a lot about a person by what they do when they think they're in control. The words are gentle, but they strip Homelander down to something uncomfortably small. Across the city, people are no longer panicking. They are watching. The fires are mostly out now. Emergency crews cautiously move closer, and every camera is still focused on the man in black who hasn't raised his voice once. Homelander lunges again, unable to tolerate the conversation anymore. His fist slams into the invisible boundary, stopping inches from Gojo's face like before. But this time, Gojo doesn't ignore it. He reaches out and lightly grabs Homelander's wrist. The contact is real. For the first time since this began, Gojo allows physical touch. Homelander's eyes widen in shock. He tries to pull back, but he can't. Not because Gojo is squeezing hard, but because the space around his arm feels anchored, fixed in place by something he cannot overpower. Gojo looks at the trapped wrist with mild interest, and says softly that this is what he meant by allowing interaction. Then he releases him. Homelander stumbles backward, staring at his own hand like it betrayed him. That brief moment of contact tells him everything he feared. The barrier wasn't something he was failing to break. It was something Gojo was choosing to maintain. Gojo rolls his shoulders again, loosening up slightly. His posture shifts, not into aggression, but into readiness. He explains calmly that Homelander is going to keep escalating unless someone shows him clearly where the limit is. And since nobody else here can do that, he supposes it falls to him. The sentence is delivered, with the same tone someone might use when volunteering to carry groceries. Homelander charges forward again, in blind frustration. This time, Gojo doesn't let the punch stop. He steps slightly to the side, not dodging but adjusting space itself, and Homelander's momentum carries him forward past where Gojo was standing. Homelander stumbles as his own force pulls him off balance. Before he can recover, Gojo places 2 fingers gently against Homelander's chest. There is no visible blast, no shockwave. Homelander is suddenly 100 feet away, embedded halfway into the side of a concrete building. The entire exchange takes less than a second. Cameras catch it from 3 angles. Online, the clip loops endlessly. People slow it down frame by frame and still cannot see how Gojo moved him. It looks like Homelander teleported backward through solid air. Inside the building, Homelander hangs there, stunned. Not hurt, but overwhelmed by the realization that he never even saw the action happen. Gojo doesn't pursue. He stays where he is, hands falling back into his pockets. He calls out calmly, asking if Homelander is starting to understand. And for the first time, Homelander doesn't answer immediately. Because he is. Homelander pulls himself out of the concrete slowly, fragments of the wall crumbling down around his boots as he steps back onto the street. He doesn't rush this time. He doesn't fly. He walks. The cameras catch every second of it, zoomed in close enough that viewers can see the shift in his expression. The anger is still there, but it's no longer loud. It has gone inward, condensing into something tighter and more dangerous. Across Manhattan, people are no longer asking what's happening. They are asking who is in control. On social feeds, 2 images circulate side by side. One shows Homelander in the sky, eyes burning, carving destruction through buildings. The other shows Gojo standing calmly in the middle of the same disaster, hands in his pockets, untouched, quietly stabilizing the chaos. The comparison spreads faster than any official statement Vought can draft. Narratives form without permission. Inside Vought Tower, Ashley watches the trend graphs climb with a hollow expression. Public sentiment is shifting in real time. For years, Vought controlled the story around subs through spectacle and fear. Now, the spectacle is working against them. The more people watch, the more they see Homelander as the cause and Gojo as the solution. Nobody in the room knows how to counter that. On a rooftop several blocks away, Starlight lowers her phone and exhales slowly. She knows exactly what this means. The illusion that Homelander is untouchable is breaking, and once people see that, they will never unsee it. Fear has a shelf life. Once it cracks, it doesn't come back the same way. In a dim safe house, Billy Butcher leans forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, eyes locked to the screen. He doesn't know who Gojo is, but he knows what he's looking at. Someone who makes Homelander look ordinary, and that thought settles into his mind with dangerous clarity. Back on the street, Homelander stops about 20 feet from Gojo. He doesn't attack. He doesn't speak. He just stares, trying to regain a sense of center that keeps slipping further away. Gojo notices the stillness and nods slightly, as if approving the change in behavior. Gojo remarks that this is better. He says it's easier to talk when people aren't trying to punch each other every few seconds. The casual tone is disarming, almost friendly, and it irritates Homelander more than open mockery would. Homelander asks the question that's been building inside him since this began. He asks if Gojo thinks he's stronger than him. Gojo pauses for a moment, considering the phrasing. Then he answers honestly. He says it's not really a strength comparison. It's more about how their abilities work. He explains that Homelander measures everything in terms of force, while Gojo exists in a space where force is irrelevant. The explanation is simple, almost gentle, and it lands like a verdict. Above them, news helicopters hover at a careful distance. Reporters speak in hushed, confused tones because the situation no longer fits the format of a breaking crisis. It feels like witnessing a shift in something deeper than a fight. It feels like watching a system fail. Homelander looks around at the cameras, the helicopters, the distant crowds watching from behind police lines. He sees it clearly now. The attention is no longer admiration. It is evaluation. People are watching him the way they watch a problem being handled. That realization hurts more than any physical blow. Gojo tilts his head slightly, sensing the emotional spike again. Through the 6 eyes, Homelander's psychological state is as visible as his physical one. Gojo understands that the real damage happening here isn't to buildings, it's to identity. He says quietly that Homelander should probably leave for now, not as an order, as practical advice. He adds that this doesn't need to go any further today. Homelander stiffens at the suggestion. Leave. In front of all these cameras, in front of the world. The idea feels unbearable, but staying feels worse because every second he stands here, Gojo's calm presence erodes him further. Miles away, Starlight watches Homelander's posture and realizes he's trapped in a way she's never seen before. Not by force, by perception. Inside Vought Tower, Ashley whispers that they need Homelander out of there immediately. Not because he's losing a fight, but because he's losing the narrative. Homelander takes a slow step backward, then another. He doesn't break eye contact with Gojo. He lifts into the air gradually, almost reluctantly. There is no dramatic exit, no sonic boom, no declaration. He simply rises and drifts away into the sky. The moment is quiet and devastating. Across Manhattan, people watch Homelander leave without finishing the fight. The image burns itself into public memory. He did not win. He did not dominate. He retreated. Gojo watches him go with mild curiosity, hands still in his pockets. He doesn't pursue. He doesn't comment. He simply turns his attention back to the city around him, scanning the damage, ensuring the situation remains stable. Emergency crews begin moving in cautiously now that the immediate threat is gone. Police form tighter perimeters. Reporters start speaking louder, trying to process what just happened. The mood shifts from panic to stunned disbelief. And at the center of it all stands a man who hasn't raised his voice once. Gojo glances around at the gathering responders and realizes something important. This world doesn't understand what just happened yet. They think they witnessed a fight. They didn't. They witnessed a balance shift. Because for the first time, Homelander has encountered something he cannot overpower, intimidate, or control. And everyone saw it. The city does not return to normal. Traffic doesn't resume. News cycles don't move on. Conversations in apartments, offices, and emergency shelters all orbit the same question. Who was the man in black and why did Homelander leave? The footage plays on every screen over and over until the rhythm of it becomes familiar. Homelander attacking. Gojo standing still. The military failing. The fires bending away from him. And then the quiet moment where Homelander rises into the sky and simply goes. For the first time in years, people aren't speaking about Homelander with awe or fear. They're speaking about him with analysis. Inside Vought Tower, Ashley listens to focus group audio that makes her stomach drop. Words like unstable, reckless, and dangerous are now attached to Homelander's name. And words like calm, controlled, and protective are attached to Gojo, a man Vought has no file on. The shift is happening too fast to manage. PR teams draft statements that never get released because none of them make sense. They cannot spin footage where Homelander looks like the problem and Gojo looks like the solution. In a safe house miles away, Billy Butcher watches the same clips on repeat. He leans back with a slow grin forming on his face. He doesn't know who Gojo is, but he knows what he represents. For the first time, there is someone Homelander can't bully into submission, and that thought is more intoxicating than any weapon Butcher has ever held. On a rooftop overlooking the damaged blocks, Starlight stands with her arms folded, staring at the street where it happened. She can still see Gojo down there, surrounded now by emergency responders who keep a cautious distance from him. Nobody approaches too close. Nobody tells him what to do. They treat him with a kind of quiet respect they never give Homelander. And Gojo doesn't seem to notice or care. He stands there casually, answering a medic's questions in a calm tone, explaining that the fires won't spread anymore. He sounds like someone giving directions, not someone who just reshaped a city-wide crisis. The responders listen carefully, nodding, because instinctively they understand he is the most stable presence here. Homelander watches all of this from high above the clouds. He hasn't gone back to Vought. He hasn't spoken to anyone. He floats there in silence, staring down at Manhattan through a break in the clouds, replaying every second in his mind. The punches that stopped, the beam that split around Gojo, the helicopters sliding through the air like toys, and the worst part, the way people looked at Gojo afterward. Not with fear, with trust. That word burns in his chest like acid. Homelander is used to fear. Fear is predictable. Fear keeps people small. Trust is different. Trust gives people the confidence to stop being afraid. And if people stop being afraid of Homelander, then what is he? Down on the street, Gojo finally starts walking, not away from the scene but through it. He steps over cracked pavement and fallen glass, hands in pockets, blindfold still in place. Responders part for him without being asked. Some stare openly. Others look away, unsure how to act around someone who doesn't behave like any soup they've ever seen. Cameras follow him from a distance. The footage feels strangely peaceful compared to earlier chaos. A man walking calmly through a disaster he didn't cause but quietly contained. Inside Vought Tower, Ashley realizes something with cold clarity. They cannot frame Gojo as a threat without contradicting everything people just saw. If they attack him publicly, they risk looking like they're attacking the only person who prevented Manhattan from being worse. They are trapped by their own narrative. Homelander descends from the clouds slowly, landing on the roof of Vought Tower without a sound. Staff members who see him instinctively step out of his path. Normally, they would greet him with smiles and nervous enthusiasm. Now, they avoid eye contact. He notices. That hurts more than anything Gojo did. Homelander walks into the executive floor and demands to know who Gojo is. Nobody has an answer. He watches their faces as they explain the database searches, the failed identifications, the absence of any records. He realizes something terrible. This man came from outside, the system Vought controls. Which means Vought can't define him. Back in Manhattan, Gojo pauses at the edge of the damaged zone and looks back once. He scans the skyline with the 6 eyes, confirming that the situation is stable. He seems satisfied. Then he starts walking away from the area entirely, blending into the city like he was never the center of anything. People film him leaving. The clip spreads even faster than the fight footage. Homelander sees it minutes later on a screen in Vought Tower. Gojo walking away calmly while the city watches. No declaration, no demand for praise, no need for attention. And that is what finally makes Homelander understand the true problem. Gojo doesn't need to be seen as powerful, which makes him impossible to compete with. Homelander does not sleep. He stands alone in a dark conference room at the top of Vought Tower, the city lights blinking far below the windows, and replays the footage in silence. Every angle, every second. The punches that stopped, the missiles that hung in the air. The moment Gojo touched his wrist and let him feel just briefly what it meant to be allowed to interact. That word loops in his mind like a splinter he can't remove. Allowed. By morning, the pressure inside him has built into something sharp and desperate. He cannot let this become the story people remember. He cannot let the world settle into the idea that there is someone he cannot overpower. If that idea spreads, it changes everything. So he decides to change the narrative the only way he knows how. He flies. Not toward Manhattan, not toward Gojo. He flies to a densely populated district across the river where morning commuters fill sidewalks and traffic clogs the streets. He descends without warning and lands in the center of an intersection, cracking the asphalt beneath his boots. People freeze, phones already coming out, unsure if this is a rescue or a spectacle. Homelander smiles for the cameras. He begins lifting cars out of traffic, moving them aside with exaggerated ease. He pulls a stalled bus out of the road and sets it gently on the curb. He waves at a group of children who stare up at him in awe. He performs strength the way Vought taught him to, large and visible and reassuring. The crowd starts clapping hesitantly. Some even cheer. He needs this. He needs to see admiration again. But something is different. The applause feels thinner. The smiles are cautious. People watch him the way they watched Gojo, but with a critical distance that wasn't there before. They aren't overwhelmed. They're evaluating. Homelander feels it immediately. A man in the crowd mutters loud enough for nearby phones to catch, asking why Homelander didn't stop the fires yesterday if he's this strong. The comment spreads through the small group like a quiet ripple. Nobody confronts him, but the question lingers in the air. Homelander's jaw tightens. He continues the display, lifting heavier objects, flying faster, smiling wider, but the energy from the crowd doesn't rise to match it. They film him, but not with excitement, with documentation. Across the city, Billy Butcher watches the live stream with narrowed eyes. He recognizes what's happening instantly. Homelander is trying to reclaim the image he lost. But once people have seen behind the curtain, the trick doesn't work the same way. On a quiet street miles away, Gojo walks past a convenience store, sipping a bottled drink he picked up without much thought. A small TV in the window plays the live coverage of Homelander's display. Gojo glances at it briefly, tilts his head and keeps walking. He doesn't look concerned. He looks mildly unsurprised. Homelander notices something else as he continues his performance. People are not stepping back from him the way they usually do. They aren't afraid to stand close. A woman even walks past him without looking impressed, talking to someone on her phone about work. The normal gravity he exerts over a crowd isn't working. That's when his patience snaps. A news drone buzzes too close to his face. Normally, he would ignore it. Today, he swats it out of the air with a sharp backhand. The drone smashes into a storefront window, glass shattering onto the sidewalk. The crowd recoils slightly, but they don't scream. They don't scatter. They just stare. And in that stare, Homelander sees it clearly. They're not afraid of him, the way they were yesterday morning. High above, several helicopters pivot to capture the moment. The footage streams instantly. Social feeds begin splitting again, comparing clips of Gojo calmly stabilizing a disaster to Homelander angrily smashing a drone. Homelander looks around at the faces in the crowd and feels something unfamiliar crawl into his chest. He is losing them. Not to Gojo's strength, to Gojo's composure. Across town, Starlight watches the live stream with a sinking feeling. She can see exactly where this is going. Homelander doesn't know how to handle people who aren't afraid of him, and without fear, his control unravels fast. Back in the street, Homelander forces another smile, tries to wave it off like a joke, but the moment has already passed. The crowd's energy has shifted into quiet discomfort. Phones lower. People start walking away. Homelander stands there, suddenly aware that his performance has no audience. Miles away, Gojo finishes his drink and tosses the bottle into a trash can without looking. He pauses for a moment, glancing in the direction of the disturbance with mild curiosity. Through the 6 eyes, he can feel Homelander's emotional state spiking again, unstable and erratic. Gojo sighs softly, because he realizes this isn't over. Not because Homelander wants a fight. Because Homelander wants control back. And he's about to try something that will make everything worse. The crowd thins out faster than Homelander expects. Not in a panic, not in a rush. People simply decide they've seen enough and begin walking away in different directions, conversations resuming, phones slipping back into pockets. The moment he tried to force a spectacle, the attention dissolved. It's subtle, almost polite, and it hits him harder than open fear ever could. Homelander stands alone in the intersection he cleared, cape shifting slightly in the breeze, watching the last few onlookers leave without looking back. The silence around him feels wrong. He is used to controlling rooms, streets, entire skylines with nothing but his presence. Now, his presence feels like background noise. A police siren wails in the distance, approaching cautiously. Homelander turns toward the sound and sees the officers inside the vehicle hesitating before getting too close. They're not terrified. They're wary, and that difference feels like an insult. Something inside him finally snaps. He launches into the sky without warning, a sonic boom cracking the air as he disappears upward. The police car swerves from the shockwave. Windows rattle, people flinch, cameras catch it all. Homelander doesn't have a destination in mind. He just needs distance from the feeling clawing at his chest. He rockets across the skyline, eyes scanning the city below until they land on something that makes his expression harden. A crowded overpass. Morning traffic is packed bumper to bumper. Pedestrians walk along the side railings. It's the kind of place where visibility is high and consequences are immediate. Homelander descends slowly and lands at the center of the overpass. Cars screech to a halt. Drivers stare at him in confusion. Phones come out again, but this time there's no excitement, just tension. He doesn't smile. He grabs the front of a delivery truck and lifts it slightly off the ground, tilting it at an angle that makes the driver scream inside the cab. People begin backing away cautiously. Someone shouts for him to stop. Homelander looks around at the frightened faces and feels a twisted relief. There it is. Fear. Miles away, Gojo stops walking. He doesn't know exactly where Homelander is, but through the 6 eyes he feels the emotional spike like a flare in the distance. Panic. Intent. A decision being made for the wrong reason. Gojo's posture shifts subtly as he turns his head toward the skyline. On the overpass, Homelander lifts the truck higher. Not enough to drop it, just enough to show he could. The message is clear. He is reminding the city what he can do. Helicopters pivot again, capturing the live scene. Commentators struggle to keep their voices steady as they describe what's happening. The comparison begins instantly online. Gojo prevented destruction. Homelander is threatening it. Homelander hears the helicopters and tightens his grip on the truck. He wants the world to see this. He wants them to remember why they're supposed to be afraid. And that is when Gojo arrives. There is no flash, no sound. One moment the overpass is filled with panic and tension, and the next, Gojo is standing calmly on the concrete barrier beside Homelander, hands in his pockets, looking mildly inconvenienced. Homelander freezes. The truck remains tilted in his grip as he slowly turns his head. Gojo looks at the vehicle, then at the terrified driver inside, then back at Homelander with an expression that is not angry. It's disappointed. Gojo asks, gently, what Homelander thinks this is going to accomplish. The question lands, heavier than any accusation. Homelander tries to speak, but no answer comes, because he knows the truth. This isn't strategy, this is desperation. Gojo steps off the barrier and walks toward the tilted truck. Homelander doesn't stop him. He doesn't know how. Gojo places one hand lightly against the front bumper. Let go, he says calmly. And Homelander does. Not because he's forced to, because something in Gojo's tone makes it feel pointless to resist. The truck settles back onto the pavement without a sound. The driver sobs inside the cab. Gojo gestures lightly for the surrounding cars to back up. Drivers obey without question. The tension on the overpass dissolves into confused relief. Homelander watches this happen and feels the last piece of control slip through his fingers. Gojo didn't overpower him. He didn't threaten him. He simply walked in and handled the situation like Homelander wasn't the central factor. Gojo turns to him and says quietly that this is exactly what he was worried about. That Homelander's need to be seen as powerful is making him dangerous to people who have nothing to do with their conflict. The words are soft, reasonable, and absolutely devastating. Homelander looks around at the cameras, the helicopters, the people inside their cars staring at him with wide, uncertain eyes, not with admiration, not even with fear, with judgment. For the first time in his life, Homelander feels like the villain of the scene. Gojo sighs softly and says that this has gone far enough. The overpass is silent, except for idling engines and distant helicopter blades. Drivers sit frozen behind their windshields, phones half raised, unsure whether they are witnessing a rescue or an arrest. Homelander stands in the middle of the lane, shoulders tight, staring at Gojo like he's looking at a mirror that shows something he doesn't want to see. The truck he lifted sits safely back on its wheels, the driver still crying inside, and that small detail feels louder than everything else. Gojo doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't step closer. He simply stands there with his hands in his pockets and says that Homelander needs to understand something important before this gets worse. That phrasing, "before this gets worse," lands with quiet finality. Homelander demands to know what Gojo thinks he understands. The words come out strained, defensive, and lacking the sharp confidence he usually carries. Gojo answers calmly that Homelander isn't trying to win anymore. He's trying to stop people from seeing him differently. And the more he tries, the more obvious it becomes. The statement hangs in the air like a diagnosis. Homelander looks around again at the watching faces, and he sees it clearly now. They are not afraid to be near him because Gojo is here. The presence of someone who cannot be intimidated has changed how everyone else behaves. It's subtle but undeniable. People feel safer standing their ground. Gojo explains gently that fear is fragile. Once people see it fail, they stop believing in it. He says Homelander's real power was never strength. It was the certainty that nobody could challenge him, and that certainty is gone now. Homelander tries to argue, but the words fall apart in his mouth because every camera around them is proof that Gojo is right. Gojo takes a small step forward, not aggressive, just enough to close the conversational distance. He says that Homelander doesn't actually want to hurt people here. He's just trying to feel in control again. The tone is understanding, almost sympathetic, and that sympathy is what finally breaks something inside Homelander. Because it means Gojo sees through him completely. Homelander's eyes glow faintly, not in attack but in emotional overflow. He asks what Gojo wants from him. Gojo answers simply. He wants Homelander to stop. Not surrender, not fight. Just stop trying to prove something to people who are no longer measuring him the way he thinks they are. The helicopters hover closer now, cameras zoomed in tight. Millions watch as Homelander stands there, silent, visibly shaken by a conversation that contains no threats and no violence. Gojo adds one last thing. He says that if Homelander keeps going like this, eventually someone else will get hurt for no reason. And at that point, Gojo won't be able to treat this as a misunderstanding anymore. That is not a threat, it is a boundary. Homelander understands it instantly. For the first time since this began, he sees the line clearly. Gojo hasn't been trying to defeat him. He's been trying to prevent him from crossing a point he can't come back from. And Homelander realizes how close he just came. The overpass feels smaller, the air feels heavier, the watching eyes feel louder. Homelander slowly lifts off the ground, not in anger, not in defiance, but in quiet retreat. He doesn't look at the cameras. He doesn't say anything. He rises into the air and flies away without a sonic boom, without a dramatic exit. Just gone. Gojo watches him leave with a faint, unreadable expression. He glances at the drivers still sitting in their cars and gives a small, reassuring nod, as if telling them everything is fine now. Some of them nod back without thinking. Because they believe him. And that is the part Homelander can never undo. The overpass empties slowly. Cars begin moving again in hesitant lines, drivers glancing in their mirrors as if expecting something to fall from the sky. The helicopters peel away one by one, their cameras finally turning elsewhere. The tension that held the city tight for 2 days doesn't snap all at once. It loosens gradually, like a fist unclenching after gripping too hard for too long. Gojo remains standing on the concrete barrier for a moment after Homelander disappears. He watches the traffic normalize, listens to the distant rhythm of sirens returning to routine, and confirms through the 6 eyes that the emotional spike in the city is settling into something quieter. People are still shaken, but they are no longer bracing for impact. He steps down and walks away without announcement. No press conference, no explanation, no demand for recognition. He blends into the sidewalk foot traffic like any other tall man in dark clothes, hands in pockets, posture relaxed. A few people recognize him and stare, but nobody approaches. They don't feel the need to. The presence that calmed the crisis is now just leaving. And somehow that feels right. Across Manhattan, conversations shift. People don't talk about how strong Homelander is anymore. They talk about the moment his strength didn't matter. They replay the footage not to marvel at power, but to study composure. The image of Gojo standing still while everything else failed becomes a reference point for something new. Inside Vought Tower, the mood is funereal. Ashley sits at the head of the conference table staring at reports she doesn't know how to act on. Approval ratings for Homelander have dipped in ways they've never seen. Not because he lost a fight, but because he lost certainty. And that is something no marketing campaign can restore. They consider drafting statements. They consider spinning narratives. But every version collapses against the same problem. The footage is too clear. The world saw Homelander unable to force his will on someone, and they saw him escalate emotionally afterward. The illusion is broken. On a rooftop miles away, Starlight watches the skyline and exhales slowly. She realizes something profound. Homelander hasn't been weakened physically, but he has been weakened socially. People now know what it looks like when he isn't in control. And once you've seen that, you stop reacting to him the same way. In a dim safe house, Billy Butcher shuts his laptop with a quiet, satisfied nod. For years, he searched for a weapon strong enough to hurt Homelander. He never considered that the real weapon would be someone who didn't need to hurt him at all. High above the clouds, Homelander floats alone again. He doesn't return to Vought. He doesn't patrol the city. He just hovers there, staring down at the world that now feels slightly different beneath him. Nothing has changed physically. The buildings are still there. The streets still move. But the way people look up at the sky has changed. They are no longer searching for him first. And that realization is heavier than anything he has ever lifted. He thinks about Gojo's words, about the way he was seen, analyzed, understood without ever being attacked. He realizes slowly and painfully that Gojo didn't defeat him. He exposed him. And that exposure is permanent. Back on the ground, Gojo pauses at a crosswalk, waiting for the signal like any other pedestrian. A breeze moves through his hair. The city hums normally around him. He seems content, mildly curious about this new place but not particularly invested in it. For him, this was an interesting encounter, a brief examination of a world's strongest, a situation that needed stabilizing. Now it's over. But for this world, it is not over at all. Because the most dangerous man on the planet has just learned that there is someone he cannot intimidate, cannot overpower, and cannot control. And everyone else learned it too. The fear that once held the system together has cracked. And nothing built on fear ever returns to its original shape once it breaks. Gojo walks across the street as the light changes, disappearing into the flow of people like he was never the center of anything. Behind him, the world keeps turning. but it no longer fears the same way. And